Hello and welcome. Happy Data Privacy and Protection Day. We're so excited for all of you to be joining us today for what we're calling Technology's Impact on Job Requirements for Data Privacy. So we're going to talk all about data privacy jobs, data privacy skills, and how technology is interacting with the human capital in our industry. I'm Jared Casalia. I'm the CEO and founder of True Staffing Partners. We specialize in data privacy and protection staffing from CPO all the way to entry-level privacy professionals. And I'm joined by three of my favorite people in the business. I'm going to start to my left with Jodie Daniels from Red Clover Advisors. Jodie's been in the business for over 20 years. She's built hundreds of programs inside corporations throughout North America and probably well beyond that. And I'm so excited. She's got an amazing group of consultants that she supervises, and you can visit them at redcloveradvisors.com. Jodie, welcome.
Well, hi. I'm so excited to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, our pleasure. Can you give us real quick, tell us a little bit about what Red Clover does and why Data Privacy and Protection Day, or data privacy in general, is so important to you?
Sure. So Red Clover Advisors is a boutique data privacy consultancy. It's all about helping companies actually do the long list of tasks that all these various privacy laws require. So think of us as kind of that extra privacy office that you need, or for some companies who don't have anyone in-house for privacy, that's where we come in. We fill the gap. And data privacy to me is so important because it's all about customer trust. People are buying products and services because they believe it's going to be an amazing experience, a really awesome brand. And when it comes to data, that they can trust the company with what's going to happen with data. So I believe customer trust equals privacy, and what better day to celebrate it than today?
Amen. Hear, hear. If we move around the clock, we come to my good friend, Adi Elliott from Canopy. Canopy is a software company that specializes in reactive breach and proactive privacy data analysis, collection, etc. It's an amazing company. Adi is one of the smartest marketing and salespeople that I've personally ever met or worked with in my entire life. He's got a rich history in the legal technology community. Welcome, Adi.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Adi, tell us a little bit more about Canopy and why data privacy protection is so important to you.
Yeah, Canopy itself, the only software company in the world focused that started on the data breach response problem and kind of worked backwards into privacy from there. And because obviously all these regulations are super important worldwide, and we were just like all kind of cobbling together workaround solutions. Canopy was like, hey, let's have this problem needs a specific solution. And then privacy came as a natural outgrowth from that, of like working backwards to the corporation of saying, hey, we're purely reactive. We can actually help before something like this happens. Why it's so important to me is honestly, all these regulations, I really actually appreciate the regulatory climate of trying to help individual citizens all over the world, like get control of their data, know what's happening to their data, protect their data. And we are all, even though we're all trying to solve this problem, we're also all just people who are getting these letters in the mail whose data is trying to be stolen. So like maintaining that human side of things is super great. And it's one of those like leave the world a better place than you found it situations.
I love it and agree. Thank you. Finally, Jess Barr, who is like a sister to me and has had such an enormous impact at True Staffing Partners. She's our Vice President of Recruitment and Account Management for Data Privacy and Protection. Jess, tell us a little bit about you and anything I've missed about True that our audience should know, and why Data Privacy Protection Day or in general is so important to you.
Awesome. Very happy to be here. So I, alongside my team of awesome colleagues, lead our data privacy offering at True. Our clients range everything from Fortune 5 all the way on down to Series A startups. So my perspective on this panel today will be coming from the perspective of employment. What are employers looking for? How can you break into privacy? leveraging technology in unconventional ways if you don't already have that background. And then I'm also a recovering attorney by background. So I can also bring the perspective of how lawyers can break into a more technology-focused space. Privacy Day is exciting and important to me because I have found through working in this vertical, I didn't come to this vertical with like an innate interest in privacy, but it developed. And in my personal life now as a consumer, I just find it so important and exciting and fascinating. So happy to be here.
Beautiful. For me, I've come to accept that I thought as a kid we'd be growing up in what would be the robotics age, and I would have, my Jetson lifestyle by the time I was 40. That didn't work out. Instead, we're in the information age, and instead of leaving behind a robot that will be a mirror of myself, I'm going to be leaving behind all my data when I pass this earth. And it's really important to me that I have some control over the impression that I leave behind for generations to come, for my children and future people. It's a privilege to be able to leave something behind, a digital footprint that, our predecessors just didn't have the opportunity to do, right? They're writing on walls. We've got something, really special as a species here. And it's really important to me that there are rules and regulations around it and people are being responsible with it. Because we're not just dealing with consumerism, right? We're dealing with who we are as a human species and the shadow we leave behind. Having said that, I'm in this vertical, not only for that reason, but because I love this community. I love the intersection of legal and technology. And I think it's a really ripe industry for rapid professional development. There's tons of jobs out there. But what's even more exciting, what is going to be required from the human capital in these jobs has changed from where we were in 2018 when GDPR hit and we saw a huge surge in investment in human beings in the privacy industry. And now we're seeing this second wave that, as we see it, is almost 3 times the size of hiring as compared to what we saw during GDPR. So people are really, really developing privacy talent. There's tons of opportunity here. But what they ask for today from the people who wield privacy technology will be very different, I believe, and I think my panelists believe, than what they may ask of the talent 5 years from now and beyond. So I want to start with Adi, since he's our software company on the panel, and help give me an understanding, right? Because a lot of people that are buying Canopy haven't used it before, obviously. And you're not providing, hey, here's all the talent you need to wield this technology. They're going to have to use it and wield it themselves in-house when they use it to solve privacy problems. What are the skills that make ripe for someone to be able to use your technology? Or what skills would you encourage people look for when they delegate people to wield your technology?
So it's a great question. And I'll put the baseline of curiosity and interest in software and all that technical stuff, like not highly technical, but technical, reasonably curious about software. That's kind of a baseline. And it's funny how quickly this gets to your wheelhouse. The people who use our software, what they're trying to do is make an impact on an organization. They're trying to change behaviors, change policies, change procedures, and they don't control the resources often that are responsible for changing those resources. So they really need to be consensus builders. They need to build buy-in. They need to win friends and influence people. And somebody, in a lot of ways, somebody that people like working with. And I would almost put this as like the other side of the cliche of the IT person is kind of sometimes the house of no, here's how we do things. This is how it's going to be. Whereas on the privacy side, people are just trying to do their jobs in these businesses. That they're trying to get from point A to point B. They're compensated to get from point A to point B. Their whole world is that, so they're thinking about that. So for someone to come along and say, hey, I potentially like you to do your job differently or with a different kind of constraint, you're gonna have to explain to them what's in it for them or why it's important. So I would kind of start with that people skills, winning friends and influencing people, a curiosity about what the rest of the business is doing. Because if you get a report out of like our privacy audit tool and immediately go to somebody and be like, look what you did, and you're all mad about it, they're immediately going to be like, go away. Like, I want nothing to do with this. And you're not necessarily going to have an impact on the organization.
I love it. I agree with it. Jodie, agree, disagree? And assuming you agree, which I think you probably will to some extent, how do you interview or look for professionals or identify professionals in an organization or to join an organization that have that skill?
Sure. Well, so I would say I would agree, and I would take it even a step further. The influencer part's really important. Many of these tools require cross-functional capabilities. This isn't a tool that generally the privacy team is going to own. It's going to be all by themselves. Like, let's kind of think about a different tool. Think about in the finance world, or, you know, the people who are doing accounting. The rest of the organization doesn't typically do that. They might just get a little slice of reporting or something. Here, privacy, maybe one team will own it, but many others will be a part of it. Think marketing, IT, business owners, and other users, depending on which software you're buying. So the ability to be able to influence and really build that cross-functional relationship and buy-in, like Adi, you were just talking about, it's going to be really important. In interviewing, I would want to be able to see that kind of experience. And to me, we might kind of talk about this a little bit more, but we have kind of the technical people who can manage this technology and then almost like the users of it. I still think that cross-functional piece is important on either side. In terms of interviewing, I'm going to want to be able to see, how can you manage throughout the organization? Have you used technology before? Maybe you had to implement something. It doesn't have to be privacy software. Maybe it was a marketing tool or a finance tool. The idea of taking something new and having to learn it, as you said, we're all learning. It's all new. It's all going to keep evolving. How does someone learn? What they find interesting and challenging, to me, are going to start to find the people that will be successful in any tool you put in front of them.
So Jess, I'm going to kick it over to you and I'm going to ask this question. Right now, not future state, but right now, how are employers valuing that skill set? Influence, evangelism, ability to affect change by persuading people to integrate and use technology in their daily life versus, say, just hands-on technical skills of actually wielding some of these technologies?
So the short answer to your question is basically above all else. The ability to influence, the ability to evangelize is of absolute paramount importance. And the primary reason for that is because privacy, the way we talk about it today in 2022, is an industry that's still very much in its infancy to adolescence, right? And so it is net new thinking to a lot of folks who are outside the vertical. As such, the ability to influence cross-functional stakeholders and executive level folks who think of privacy as just an attaché to compliance, to turn around that thinking and start thinking about privacy as, you know, a competitive differentiator, as a value add to the business, and not just, you know, a check the box regulatory function. Right?
We've had people that consider it like moral too. Like, we've had clients that literally, they think of it as a moral responsibility. And I would even add to that, what's interesting about privacy, and I'll like put kind of legal and IT in the same buckets, because these are like the same sort of, like, not part of the, like, not in the business per se, but supporting the business, is like, if someone's buying like new servers or upgrading some sort of cloud architecture, that's hard to explain. Like, oh, there's going to be downtime, there's going to be that, like, whatever. And if you're like implementing some element of legal, oh, well, we signed a contract, requires X and Y and Z, like, people kind of glaze over. But privacy has a separate, everybody gets it. We all get that we want our data to be secure. There's a Venn diagram that allows you to have that conversation with people, that in a way that on the legal side, even on the finance side, like, how many times we've been in meetings where they pull up a spreadsheet and people just glaze over and they're like, I guess Q3 is look it up. Like, whereas privacy is just different than that, and that there's such an opportunity to land the plane with people.
Absolutely. There's such an opportunity to teach, and what an exciting opportunity to teach interest to, particularly to the executive level, right? And so that way, privacy becomes baked into the culture. It becomes a cultural imperative, and to your point, an ethical imperative. And we're seeing that particularly in B2C organizations, is the ethical component.
So let's go a complete 180 for a second and get deep into the weeds here. For some companies, and I think, probably, and Jess, tell me if you agree, part of the reason why, above all else, influence is the number one requirement for a privacy professional is because the industry is still hiring people generally at a 5 to 10 years of experience rate, right? We're still placing tons of chief privacy officers, regional privacy officers, and then, we're beginning now to come down to that 2 to 5 years of experience where more mature organizations are building human capital that have varying degrees of both responsibility and compartmentalization of responsibility and skill set, the more that their program matures and scales. What about the really mature programs? And I want to turn to a D and we'll go around again, but what are they doing? What are they putting their hands on and actually doing with the tech every day and wielding the tech in a very tactical level right now?
So for our perspective, the way we fit in, and I'm curious to hear Jodie's take on this too, because we have kind of software and doing it on, we see kind of a few buckets. Bucket number one is highly technical, almost like IT-ish software. And that's going all over the company and trying to find, often going all over, although that's challenging, but trying to find stuff to remediate or do something about. And then the other side is more on the training, surveys, trying to validate that you are in compliance with what you think you want to be in compliance with. And it's happening at a bunch of levels. I don't know. Jodie, what do you think? What are your people doing? And when you describe a high functioning organization, what does it look like to you?
So I think because we're still in the infancy, any of the privacy technology that people have, even in a mature program, is still in its infancy.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's so
and
early.
I've seen companies pick a software and then a year, 2 years later, what they thought and how they set it up, they realized, that's not going to really work. Let's change it. Because before maybe I did it for GDPR. Now I have CCPA. And now going forward, I have a different alphabet soup that I have to contend with. And, you know what? We didn't actually think we were going to need software for maybe individual rights. But gosh, with all these different laws, maybe I need that now. Now, how is that going to work with the first piece of software that I did? Or the cookie piece I had, maybe I just dealt with the EU, but now I'm more global or all the different rules. So I feel like for a mature program, even though they might be farther ahead in some of their integrations, kind of dependent on the volume and type of data, they might have more sophisticated technology. They would definitely have people on the ground who are you're the technology expert here, and they're using it in a daily basis. And at the same time, they're continuously reviewing, does this work for the next evolution, for the next ABC letter law that I have to contend with?
Does it make sense? Because I almost see, because we started in data breach, we're almost coming into Rev 2 or something of thinking and on the privacy side. And a lot of it was, Rev 1 was in some ways, I would almost call it software magical thinking, that we're going to get this software and that is going to solve things. And by the way, people think that about every element of the business. The number of times a CRM is going to get bought and it's just going to make the sales team this is going to do it. This is going to do it. And now it's all right, nope. It turns out process and how it all fits in is a super big part of this whole thing. And that's where your teams are.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, you have people, process, technology. That's the perfect intersection of this whole panel, right? Is you have the technology to help make the program more successful. You need the people, or otherwise whatever's in the software, it could just say Mickey Mouse, but you've checked the box. And then if you want an effective program, you have to build process to make the people and the technology work as smoothly and effectively as possible.
So what I'm hearing is we're still in the building phase and creating foundational, whether it's software or software customization of third-party products. We're developing almost that foundation of how the technology will be integrated into the corporation and maybe reconfiguring that based on fail and success rates of different processes. So let's go forward for a second. Let's go really, 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 really deep forward for a second. What should technology start doing for us down the road so that humans don't have to do this anymore? Let's talk future state for a second. What should be replaced in terms of what's expected of human beings to do on a day-to-day basis? I'll start with Jodie.
I think to try and take out some of the tediousness and some of the guesswork, the automation is always a little bit tricky. And part of why that's tricky is so many organizations have gone from centralization to decentralization. And with the proliferation of SaaS tools, that means Jodie hanging out in marketing can go get any SaaS tool I want, and no one else in the company knows that. So in a perfect universe, somehow my technology would crawl and find all of those too. And what I see is it tends to find the big systems, the things that are connected to databases, and it's doing a nice job of that. Some way of triggering, oh, you know what, flag in your process for privacy by design, you have this awesome new product. It's going to start triggering, oh, well, this law requires this and that law requires this, those kinds of things to be able to help identify where some of the risks and the issues are going to be. I still believe there's interpretation of these laws and it's business. So you need the human element to be able to really do the higher level thinking and strategy work. And then you'll need people to make sure you have the technology set up properly. But in my perfect little crystal ball version, it would help to really do some of those tactical things and leave humans to do the higher level thinking.
If I can jump in, one of the things that I think that technology should do in the future, from where I'm sitting, is technology needs to be so accessible that the cross functionality is usable across the business. Someone without a technical or privacy background who sits in marketing, who sits in HR, can seamlessly integrate into the organization in a way that is understandable without having to go through all of the layers of people explaining why this, why do we need to do this, how it impacts you.
I think an interesting part of this too, and Jodie kind of hinted at this, is like at a high level, we all agree that we want our data protected. That makes perfect sense. We should have regulations around that. What is wild is seeing the interpretations of that across the world, because the state of California, the state of Virginia, the state of Illinois, the European Union, England, Australia have radically different, Canada have radically different interpretations of what that actually means tangible. And they have different data, obviously, that they care about. So in some ways, yeah, like they get to both of your points, like that the strategic thinking, because I could say from a business standpoint, the centralization and decentralization are kind of simultaneous. Like you're almost getting a U in business, to where like you're either a big amalgamation that is like getting more and more global power, and you're just like buy more companies, aggregate that, get that into your business, or you're like advertising on Instagram your awesome new hat. And that's it. You make this hat. It's really good. You know exactly who you're advertising to on Instagram, and you're equally subject. You're still handling customer data. You're still doing all the same stuff. You're still operating globally in large part because people in Australia and Canada both want hats, it turns out. So it's a wild circumstance that there's so much interpretation and so much context to happen here. But the big companies and the little companies are having the same problems.
So I want to turn us now to gaps. Where are there gaps in what generally technology is doing to help solve privacy problems? And how are humans expected to fill those gaps? I'll go back to Jodie to start with us. Where do you see gaps in what tech is doing for us right now in the privacy vertical?
Oh, there's a variety of them. I'll have to pick one or two. I think I might pick the individual rights arena. There are some tools that kind of help you with workflow. There are some tools that can integrate into systems. And then there are variety of different places where the customer can ask about individual rights. I could be talking to the customer service rep and say, you know what, I don't like this anymore. I want to exercise my right. If the customer service rep, just to your point about the whole organization, has no idea, well, how did that experience work out? If you think about what I shared before, where maybe I can connect all my systems because those are complex systems and I've been able to connect them. But what about the event software that we forgot about over here because that was just my easy SaaS tool that someone set up? Well, now I forgot about that. Or the Excel file that I shared on a Google Drive that, oh, we forgot about that because we use Dropbox. Or in some companies, people are using their home computers. So maybe it's on their home computer. The ability for that to solve it's a challenge. It's a massive, massive process to find all the data, explain to all parts of the organization that could have any future touch point with customers, and just train them on what you want them to do. Just send them to the privacy office, send them to this one link, as opposed to maybe training all of them. That I think is going to be a kind of a future effort. But to me, where the gap is the technology to be able to really help clearly and easily explain to frontline people who might not be privacy well versed, and be able to find all those other pieces. I think we have a great first step, as opposed to just email Jodie at company.com with your complaint. We have kind of a bit to go to continue, I think, to make this a more automated process.
And how is that being solved now in your mind using people? Are people just doing investigative, detailed endpoint and searching for missing links? How does that get handled in your mind now to solve that problem without the technology in place?
It really varies by company. I mean, some of my clients are absolutely manually doing it because there's not a good solution otherwise for them to do it, or they don't have enough to warrant the technology investment. So you have a little bit of the people cost to the technology cost and the effort to put them all together. And in some cases, there's not always a perfect solution. Other teams are moving forward with integrations. There's some nice tools out there where you can connect all the dots, and they're doing that. It gets like 95% of the way, and then somehow you still have people to review. The other thing is where people show up is sometimes not all use cases are perfectly clear. Sometimes there's well, what about this? Or what about that? Or even with all the perfect technology, people are still getting the random email because in a notice online, someone found the support at company.com or the digital rights email. And then people are sending the privacy request in there. And now it has to route its way through the company.
Fascinating. D? Gaps?
Yeah. And we have a really interesting perspective on this because we're like the world's leading data breach response company. So we see what happens when when the event is triggered, and what our like insight into privacy was that, holy cow, these companies are doing all the right things. Like a lot of these companies that have these incidents, it's not as if they don't care. They care deeply. They have all the right tech, like that's supposedly out there. They're doing the right stuff, and yet when there's an incident, like 4 out of 5, 9 out of 10, high percentage of the time, the data, like there's way more data in simple, like either like the 3 things we see a lot are business email compromises, most of it. Like most things are just like a PST, somebody's PST, they clicked a phishing link, off you go. Thing number 2 is a file share somewhere that's been ransomwared. And thing number 3 is just some database that's been compromised. And in both the file share and the business email compromise, the results of using Canopy, like when you get to the list of people and PII that was breached, it was out of compliance. Like it was not what they thought was going to be there. And even sometimes they're like, well, let's take a notify everybody approach, but we'll go through the motions and make sure and validate. And then they realize everybody was way more than they thought too. Like they didn't even know who everybody was. So if they would have ever like notified everybody, and then like they wouldn't have captured without actually looking at the data. So the gap is, for us, the gap into privacy was like, how do we get people the information to see what's really happening in their organization? Not theoretically, not what people say, because people forget what they're really doing. The HR person just forgets that, oh yeah, technically all this data lives in that system over there that's a database, but I download once a month, I download a spreadsheet and I email it to this person over there, and then they drop it on a file share and they just don't think about it. To them, it lives in that database, and they forget that they email it over until all of a sudden, unfortunately, it ends up in Canopy software and a data breach response. And we're like, well, that's 30,000 names and credit cards right there.
So how do human beings get in between to help solve this gap problem where technology is absent? How can human beings attempt to even solve that problem?
So here's our perspective is that you can't scorched earth it, because like a lot of where our take on the market was what people are trying to do right now is like look at like have endpoints everywhere and look at an entire organization. And that's ineffective, because what they're in short trying to do is run a data breach response project on an entire company. And as the leading data breach response like software, I'm here to tell you that ain't going to happen. No way. It's hard enough to do it on like one PST very effectively. So, and get an insurance company to like pay for it, and it's not cheap and blah, blah, blah. So you're not, so instead what you got to do is get signal. Like, don't look at, if you have 30 people in HR, just look at like one or two. Like in our software just allows you to be like that's what we're into, is like, you just need one or two. And when you react, when you see what's in there, don't freak out and immediately say, hey, we got to go remediate. No. Ask questions about why that data is there to begin with. How did it get there? What's the business process? Drop a report in the middle of the table and say, hey, we're here to work with you. We're all people here. So like, let's figure out, is it different processes? So for me, the scorched earth approach, it augments it's important to augment the training and the surveys and like that stuff is critically important. It's important to have all that stuff, but then you kind of have to have audits of the data as well. You have to actually look and see what people are doing.
I would offer on the privacy side, so thinking about companies executing new marketing campaigns and new products, that's going to all be people coming up with, here's my cool new idea.
Yep.
That is process and training to be able to help make sure that those people understand, oh, I should pay attention to privacy, and technology can help manage that part for them, to be able to document what it is that is actually going to be part of that project and be able to create those risk flags. Oh, ding, 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 you're doing these kinds of things. Well, then you want to be thinking about X, Y, and Z. It's going to start with people, because technology is only created by the people who come up with the cool new ideas.
Yep.
It's the flags that have to get created. And I think that's where technology is a really helpful intersection.
Jodie, to that end, one of the things that we talk about at True the most frequently with both hiring managers and with candidates we're working with is the ability to be multilingual, right? In a unique way, not speaking both Portuguese and English, but speaking the language of technology, the language of legal, the language of engineering to the different stakeholder groups.
I think
it's really important. I mean, if I'm on a call with an engineering team and they're explaining what they're doing, I have to be able to interpret that from a privacy point of view. Or if I'm sitting with a general counsel who's rattling off legal requirements, you need to be able to translate what does that mean to the marketing and to the privacy team. So you very much are a translator across all of those different departments.
And you get to learn about an entire business. Like I would say, if I were like in an adjacent space, one of the huge draws to me about this space, along with like, it's a way to feel good about, like I said, like leaving the earth a better place than you found it, protecting people. That's awesome. And you can wake up every day feeling like you're making a difference. But the other cool thing, if you're like a business nerd like me, is that you actually can learn about what businesses are trying to do. What is HR actually trying to accomplish on a day-to-day basis? What are the engineers and product people actually building? What is a marketing campaign doing and how's it doing it? That's really rad, because like there are not a lot of parts of the business whose job it is to deeply understand what everyone else in the business is trying to accomplish. So you end up with this big business brain of just understanding the entire machinations of a business. That's just not possible in a lot of other places inside the organization.
I think it's so interesting because many of us on this panel come from a background in e-discovery, and it's kind of the antithesis in that space, right? Yep. You're not looking to really understand the business. You're looking to find a smoking gun. You're looking for the needle in the haystack, and once you've found it, it's kind of like game over. Now it's about legalese to some extent, right? As opposed to, okay, let's go back and find more smoking guns, and we're always looking for smoking guns in our ecosystem of data, and then relating that back to how we drive the business forward, right? Complete antithesis of e-discovery. However, where I do think there's a lot of similarities is this persuasion conversation, this evangelizing of technology, this educating the non-power user into becoming a competent user in order to better their business, right? And there is that dynamic there. I want to unpack one thing and ask how you feel like it relates to technology. And I want to use the e-discovery industry as kind of a comparison, right? In ESI, for the longest time, there's been a dominant single tool. that has permeated the industry, such to the extent that when hiring managers go to market for the last, I would say, 3 to 5 years, the number one skill set they've been looking for is experience with a specific piece of technology, right? Relativity. There's no secret. We can name the 800-pound gorilla in the room. They do very well for themselves, right? And we're kind of seeing a slight change in the market from that modality, where the actual tool-specific vocational skill set of wielding this piece of technology is what gives an individual competitive advantage. Why will we not see that happen in privacy? Because there's a behemoth in the room in privacy as well. Why do we think privacy won't go in that direction?
Who did you want to start with?
Jess, I'll start with you.
Okay. I don't think, well, first of all, I think the privacy and the e-discovery communities are born out of different imperatives, right? And so I think that's going to prevent the quandary that e-discovery finds itself in of being so tool focused, right? And the ability, thinking early on in the maturation of privacy as an industry, about the ability to influence. The things that we're talking about today, I think, are really what's going to ultimately prevent this quandary. So instead of, and something to that point, something that we talk about a lot with hiring managers right now is they'll say, hey, this is the privacy tool that we use in-house. We want them to have experience with this. And so redirecting that thinking a little bit is a crucial part of the initial conversation. Do you really need someone with that tool? Or do you need someone tech savvy? Because tech savvy and I know this particular tool inside out are wildly different skill sets, right? You don't, you want someone who understands how a luxury sports car hugs the road, not just someone who has driven this year and model of Ferrari, right? And Jodie made a similar point earlier about that ability to kind of be tech forward without being tool specific, being more tool agnostic.
And before D jumps in, because I know he's got a lot to say on this topic, and I want to hear it. I just, for our listeners, Jess, I want to go on a slight tangent and then we'll come back.
Yeah.
Would you say that, because we saw it happen in e-discovery where, knowing federal rules for civil procedure was important, but not really mission critical to being in the e-discovery ecosystem and a contributor in that ecosystem for most of the jobs in that marketplace. I mean, you need basic understanding. Do you think the same will be true or is true of privacy professionals as it relates to privacy law and its fragmentation? Or do you think that even the technologists need to have a deeper and more enriched understanding of the regulatory laws to be successful in this industry?
I'm going to give you the attorney answer. Say it with me. It depends.
It depends. And I'm not even the attorney.
So I think it depends. It depends on myriad factors, not the least of which is the size of the org, right? And the breadth of what the privacy program either is now or is going to be in the future. Because obviously in a smaller org with a smaller privacy program, you're going to have someone who wears multiple hats and can speak fluently from the perspective of at least knowing the basics of most of the imperative regs, right? For whatever jurisdictions the organization operates in, as well as having some technologist background. My hope is that long term, privacy is going to be, as the maturation of privacy increases, that we're going to get to a place where everyone is not going to have to wear so many hats. We're seeing things move in that direction. To your point earlier, we started at the top, and now as we fill out in the middle and bottom of privacy programs, we're seeing more opportunities to specialize a little bit in an area of knowledge, be that regulatory, be that a more technical prowess. But right now we're still at a maturation model where a lot of folks are having to wear multiple hats.
So I'm going to kick it back now to a D. Why will the 800-pound gorilla not do what relativity has done, and why should it?
And for just for full disclosure, I led and founded the marketing and enterprise sales organizations inside of Relativity, and was a very early employee there. So I have a unique perspective on that. But here's what I'll say: is the difference in there's a very different market and problem to be solved. So if you think about it, what we really took advantage of was the idea, and this is true today, even though the e-discovery companies don't love to talk about it, but it's project-based, and the deliverable is just a set of essentially responsive documents. And here's just the truth of the e-discovery world is it's really commoditized. So it lends itself to one player taking over the market to be the tool to do it, because the truth of the matter is, for any e-discovery provider and e-discovery software, for each project, you're going to give them a bag of documents, and then out of the other side is going to come a deliverable of produced responsive documents to the other side. And the kind of simple truth is, you're not going to get a meaningful, different result for anyone that you hire to do that anymore. The table stakes is they can do that. So it kind of doesn't matter. And what you don't want is a proliferation of a bunch of different kinds of technology to solve this incredibly narrow known problem. So it lends itself for one provider to come in and just say, nah, just use this. This is it. Don't think about it. You're going to get the same damn production is going to come out the other side of all of them. Who cares? Or meaningfully different, because the edge case responsive documents, they might get an extra, this company, they found a few more responsive documents. Yeah, but that you're not going to use them in a deposition. You're not going to use those documents in court. They're not the smoking gun. So doesn't matter. Whereas in privacy, it's what each company is trying to accomplish internally is not just a set project with documents go in, deliverable comes. It's way more complex than that. There's way more going on of what jurisdictions do you work in? What jurisdictions are your clients in? How big are you? What's a reasonable amount to spend on this problem? It's such a deeper area of complexity, and there's way more vectors for other companies to come in and make a difference. Because obviously, if you're a OneTrust, you're going to try and aggregate the whole industry and dominate everything, no doubt. But they have to fight off a lot more vectors of competition. There are a lot more vectors of competition. As Canopy, we're complementary. We do a thing that they don't do at all. And our argument would be you need both us and them. And where Relativity, they're not fighting off everyone that they have competitors, but the competitors do literally the same things they do. Documents come in, production goes out, and all the people using, if you're using Relativity, why, for the most part, why would you use anything different? It works really well for this problem. Whereas privacy is just so much more complex, so many more challenges, evolving quickly. Who knows the next state that's going to regulate a thing that then changes what the CPO of that company is going to have to interpret. It's just a lot of different stuff going on. That's my business take.
So before I go to Jodie, because I know she's got some great perspective on this too, I just want to come back to Jess for a second. Jess, would you argue that because of this very Genesis state that we're in, and I saw a list of probably 572 companies, something like that. It was 576 companies that are software companies that are getting into the privacy space or have taken venture capital or private equity in order to seed themselves to start developing technology for the privacy space. So I think we're about to see a renaissance of new tech trying to come in all sorts of different vectors. So my question for you, Jess, is for all our listeners out there, as we come back to this topic of technology impacting job requirements, is there some competitive advantage for a job seeker who also, like a tech company, finds a vector where there is not enough talent servicing that vector? And if so, what are those vectors?
So the short answer is yes, absolutely. Where we see, where I would say that we're seeing the most opportunity for folks in that space is your pre-IPO companies, right? Is the pre-IPO companies are looking for that building phase, right, from their VC backers or whomever it is. So I would say that's where we're finding the opportunity is really significant to be on the ground level.
Let me redirect the question, because I think it's a little bit of a different question. For example, working on DSAR is a vector, right? Sure. Working on ROPA would be a vector. Working on breach would be a vector. Where are the vectors where you see that there's tech opportunity? And Jess and Jodie, where are the vectors where you see there's human opportunity?
So I would say the biggest vectors now, using the broadest strokes, right, are making sure, because there's this fear factor with the alphabet soup, right? And so it is, how do we operationalize compliance with GDPR, with CCPA, with PIPE? Now, as we go down, as we kind of funnel down to more specific vectors from that broad strokes, we're definitely looking, a lot of privacy hiring managers are looking at, the ability to create and manage PIAs, the ability to oversee, even if someone else is doing the day-to-day, the ability to oversee and be the escalation point for DSARs. From a pragmatic operational perspective, I would say those are the two of the biggest asks that we have, that we receive from our clients.
Jodie, I'll bounce over to you.
Sure. So I think a couple different thoughts. For the size of the company, if people want to really go to the bigger companies, then the vector approach might work, because the people who are going to be managing preference centers and cookie controls and whatever new cookie thing comes along, that's a very special skill set. And at a smaller company, though, the person might be tasked with needing to know a lot of it. So I think that's also a huge personal preference. Big company, small company, people like different types of things. And in terms of where I see, kind of to your other question about the people versus the technology and the behemoth, in theme with what everyone's been sharing, privacy is so vector specific, kind of like how you've done it. And as a result, for some companies, they like having one big vendor that can manage all of it. And for other companies, they don't. It's why there's over 100 cookie companies out there. And they prefer, I want a cookie company over here, and I want a data aggregation company that's going to be able to hook in over here. Adi, what you're doing is a whole other slice of the privacy piece. The way we like to look at privacy is a privacy operations framework that almost is basically cutting all the laws into their slices. So your data inventory, some people might want one tool, and someone else might want that different tool for preference center because of the kind of data they have. Again, some want all of it in one big house, and others want to separate it. And you're going to continue to see that evolution come along, and the people side will be in the implementation and the interpretation. I do think you have to know the laws to be able to adequately say your cookie banners are set up this way, or for your preference center, you can set it up like this. But without understanding the law, whether it's that person or you get an extra person, again, I think that depends on the size of the organization. Otherwise, it's just a piece of technology. The whole point of the technology is you have to set it up the way your business works in those jurisdictions. And that's the human piece and the strategy element that comes along.
Adi, I'm going to give you the last word on this topic and where there are technology vectors that are opportunistic. And then we're going to take some questions from the audience.
Cool. I guess I'd say, and again, it's purely our perspective on seeing the world through like the data breach response lens, because we see the worst, in a lot of ways, the worst case scenario. And then we're working backwards on privacy for that. And we think we're the only company that's working backwards from that in a lot of ways. But our where the gaps are for us and what we're seeing is the assumption that the incident is going to happen, like just the straight up acceptance that it's going to happen. So how do we put things in place that mean that incident doesn't turn into a breach? Meaning when somebody clicks that phishing email, yeah, it's annoying, it's frustrating, but there's no PII there. There's not an impending class action coming because they're like the wrong data was there. It's not quite we're held hostage and we have to pay this. It's just the pay the ransom or whatever it is. It's just frustrating and annoying, but it's a kind of a non-event. It's more of like a spam thing, a spam email that got through, and less of a, like we got to notify 30,000 people now. So how can we like get it to where the main vectors are assumed to be going to be compromised, which for us is like emails and file shares. That's how we think of it. It's like no one knows what's in there. And like in our world, by the way, like this is like stunning to me, and this kind of gets at what Jodie was saying on size. Our first client that we ever had for privacy audit was like a $200 million company. And their whole disposition was just like, we think this is the morally right thing to do. We want to know. For us, changing behavior is the biggest impact we can have. We have other parts of our privacy program, but this is a biggie. And then the second was like a $10 billion company that bought a bunch of companies and just like, we just have no idea what's over there. We have no idea. And everyone that knew what was over there left. And I don't know that I trust them anyway. We bought a bunch of companies. We have no idea what data we have. And we just want to get a flavor for it. So we know whether it is just worth deleting or whether it like we need to hang or how risky it is. And like, so that's why like Maria's like 200 million, 10 billion. Yeah, that's a swing. But that's
I love that analogy. And it kind of inspired me to think of this other thing that relates back to Jess mentioning IPO companies, which is if you're someone who has experience with mergers and acquisitions, if you're somebody who has experience, whether you're privacy or a security professional, quite frankly, where you know exactly that problem, we don't know how their data is organized or what's in their data, or if we're buying a mess and maybe we haven't, done that level of due diligence because, we're not Aon and Wills Tower Watson, we're two much smaller companies that play in a much smaller field, and we're not going to do a full, forensic investigation of their entire data mapping institution before we buy this company. That is a skill set and a vector that we're seeing increasing demand for, of people who know how to handle that particular challenge of, okay, we're going to buy some companies and what happens next and where's our risk. I think that's a good vector for those of you who have that experience to highlight and surface. Okay, let's take some questions. Yeah, we got 10 minutes.
Questions.
This first one is from a law student, and I'm going to let Jess answer first. How can law graduates best position themselves for entry-level data privacy jobs?
Okay. So there are several ways that you can do this. I would say the first and the thing that will stand out on paper the most and showcase your passion and willingness, get certified. I think the best for someone who is a US trained attorney, I think the best and easiest certification to start with is the CIPP US. There's a little inherent knowledge of the United States law that will advantage you. So start with your CIPP US and have that, right behind your name and JD on your resume, right? So that will set you apart from the pack initially. Also, while we're staying on the topic of resumes, at the top, lead, even if you're doing something ostensibly unrelated, either in your research, in your internships, or in your first couple jobs as an attorney, showcase anything that is relevant, right? To showcase that cross functionality. So for example, you could volunteer, raise your hand to be the privacy champion for, your legal litigation team, which is ostensibly unrelated, but volunteer to be the privacy champion and lead with that on your resume, right? Other things that I think are important in the interview process, if you don't have the experience to fall back on, showcase things that are, for example, times that you help someone avoid making a critical error within the business, right? Those types of examples are so lateral to what the privacy knowledge is and what the privacy function does, that will be really smiled upon within the interview process. So I would say, and demonstrating cross-functionality as well. We've touched on this several times throughout this hour, that no one works as cross-functionally as privacy. So if you're trying to get into privacy, showcase your ability to work and times that you've worked with different business units, right? And then finally, showcase another thing that we talked about earlier is your ability to be multilingual. Showcase your ability to speak the language of technology alongside the language of legal, alongside the language of, engineering or other business stakeholders.
Good advice. This next one, I'm going to turn to Jodie, and I love this question. I'm an ESI professional and a project manager. I see a lot of privacy jobs posted that are for program managers. What's the difference between a project and a program manager?
That's a good question. So in my opinion, no offense to any of my project management friends out there, project management to me is, here are the very specific steps that need to happen when it comes to some type of initiative. It could be a tiny initiative to a massive initiative. And a program manager is responsible for managing all the components to the privacy program. And a privacy program might be the kind of core pieces, like I had described in my operations framework. So things like the data inventories, training, the cookie compliance, the consent project. So it's about making sure that all the parts in the privacy program are doing what they're supposed to. Do we do once a year data inventories? Do we do a refresh? Do we do a privacy impact assessment? How often do we do training? Now, there's a project element to that, because if I'm going to do a data inventory, okay, who are the people? When does it need to get done? What are the very tactical steps? And that's where, if you can have a project management person also be able to do a program, they're going to actually be incredibly successful.
Adi, I'm going to give you what I think will be our last question. Can I get my hands on Canopy, and is there a certification for Canopy in process?
The easiest thing I would say is I guess if you're interested, hit me up, d.elliott, 2 L's, 2 T's at canopyco.io. We don't yet have a certification. But obviously like True is made clear that would be a helpful thing. And other folks have made clear that like, and our clients are like, hey, we'd love to get certified. We're not there yet. But hit me up and we can maybe figure something out. It's one of those things that like the real world experience is like pretty critical. And a lot of times I will say this though, we have a lot of materials on our site because the data breach response is its own world. A lot of the materials are just straight educational. And so our site, like we have stuff that is just like the difference between e-discovery, like a white paper on the difference between e-discovery and data breach response. Cause like one of the number one things we have for people coming from the e-discovery perspective is they're like it's great to be informed by it, but you kind of got to let it go too. Like, and so people get hung up on this is the way it is in e-discovery. And the answer is like, well, in data breach response, it's really different. And like, so like the documents don't even matter. It's really, we're just going to produce a list of names at the end. So like things like that. And one shout out I will give I loved that quest for Jess also. And I can't help but say this because it would be interesting. Is read like the top partners in the space, like read like Melissa Ventrone and like what cases from Clark Hill and what she's been involved in. And like read those case, or like Lindsay Nickel and Sean Hoare from Louis Brisbois and see what or Mullen Coughlin, a boutique, and Beckage, like look at the top privacy firms or attorneys in the space and like see what they're just like, if you're like a law student, look at what they're arguing about. Cause it's really interesting. Like it's riveting stuff. Yeah. So that's like working, like, and I always think from the working backwards. So we encounter them via the data breach response world. So I always work backwards from that. But from getting your hands on Canopy, our website, canopyco.io, is full of really educational materials. It's got our logo on it, so it's marketing too, but it's very educational. So go there or hit me up.
Final thoughts, 60 seconds. Jodie, we'll start with you.
Oh, so this is just such a fun and exciting space. And I think we probably have people from so many different areas, company side and individual side. Think about the transferable skills that you have. I love just what you said. It's all about explaining how you can fit. And if you're hiring, think about someone and how they can transfer those skills to be able to grow your privacy program.
Adi.
It's leave the world better than you left it. And for I remember early on in Relativity, we used to say what we were helping companies do was sue each other. And we help big companies sue each other. And that was like our kind of funny, but it's true. That's what we were doing. And like in privacy, though, you're helping protect people's data. So come over to the light side. The water's great over here. It's super interesting. So jump in, talk to True, talk to Jodie, get involved.
Jess.
Thanks for having me. I was so excited to be here. The biggest thing that I will leave everyone with, especially if you want to get into privacy, this is such a welcoming community. Everyone here is within the privacy community. Everyone's learning together. There's no such thing as a person who has 15 years of experience in GDPR. Like that human doesn't exist. And so everyone's learning together, especially as all these new regs come out. And it's such a lovely community of knowledge sharing that I encourage everyone to not sit on the sidelines and watch, but get involved.
All right. We are right at our hour. Thank you to our amazing panelists, Jess, Jodie, and Adi, brilliant minds in the industry. A pleasure. And thank you to everybody who attended. We'll see you all sooner than next year's Data Privacy Day, much sooner. Thank you.